everyone, welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show. Today is Thursday, it's Friday Eve. There's a lot that's happening in the news right now in regard to mass deportation. Of course, the illegal deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We're going to be covering that on the Jeremiah Patterson Show tomorrow in a TJPS special report that we've been working on. I first announced it on my Substack to my paid subscribers. So if you have not already, be sure to check out our Substack at tjpsnews. I not only publish articles on there, but also exclusive content, including new exclusive content coming to paid-only subscribers, so be sure to check that out. So yes, there's a lot of news happening. Of course, not just the illegal deportation of Kilmar, but also other citizens in this country who are legal residents of the United States, but they're just being snatched and thrown into detention facilities, or they're being expelled from the country. So we're going to be covering that tomorrow in a special report that you're going to want to see. It's been a long time in the works, and we're excited to bring that to you. We're also going to be covering, of course, democracy versus authoritarianism on our weekend shows. That's going to be coming up for Friday and Saturday. There's a lot going on, a lot that we're working on. Of course, the protests are happening as well. But today I wanted to give you something that is sort of, I guess, a reprieve for me. I talked to one of my friends again. His name is Jesse Hirsh. He is a former Canadian journalist. He's also the host of the MetaViews podcast. He was previously here on this show, and we spoke about it. We spoke about everything from news and politics and everything that's going on back in February of this year, I believe it was. So now he's come back on the show for a conversation. So enjoy. Be sure to comment down below your thoughts and make sure to share this video with a family or a friend. All right, Jesse, welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm coping. I don't want to say I'm doing okay because that would be a lie, but I'm doing better than most. I'm still a Canadian. I've been introducing myself lately when I appear on other people's podcasts as Canadian for now. I hope that lasts, but these days you never know. These are crazy times to be alive.
I know, and especially as you described, what's been happening with not only the trade war, but now the new leadership in Canada as well. So how has that been? Because I know y'all recently had new elections up there.
We're still in it. We are nearing the tail end of our federal election. Just last night, we had the French language debates, which were considered a big pivotal point in the campaign because our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who is a new Prime Minister, and he is dominating in the polls. Like, it looks very much as if he has gotten the ultimate blessing, which is Trump's scorn. The fact that Trump doesn't like him means that everyone in Canada, or at least a lot of people in Canada, like him. And the French language debates were meant to be a test because he's not a francophone, and his French is not very strong. But so it was worried that it could be a fatal blow, but he seemed to come out of it unscathed. And the political class, the media class here in Canada have decided that he is going to win, even though the election is a week or two away. That could be a problem unto itself, as we know from politics. But Canada right now is in a very particular spot where, on the one hand, we are fearing for our future. We are honest. We have existential dread. While at the same time, the anti-Mark Carney movement is growing stronger, and they are kind of MAGA Junior, or what's often called Maple MAGA, as in maple syrup, for the Canadian agricultural product. So you and I will have to talk in 3 months, or potentially sooner, as to. Because I think Trump is deliberately staying silent during the election. And I think once the election's over, he's going to start attacking Canada again. And again, I that could unleash a whole new level of trade chaos, given the Canadian premier's desire to cut off the electricity to northern states. I'm rambling. I apologize, please.
No, and you do make a good point to whereas it's not just in the United States where we're seeing sort of like this rise of this fascistic rhetoric and actions, but it's also in Canada and in other countries where right-wing governments are rising up. So it's not just here. Like, as someone who is not only an intellectual, but studies movements like this around the world as a journalist, how does that make you feel?
Scared. I scared on the one hand, emboldened on the other, because
Hmm.
the opposite is true too. We are seeing protests around the world.
Yes,
We are seeing resistance around the world. But you're right. There is Trump's election created a rally cry for the far right
it
everywhere.
did.
And it has given them a kind of momentum, a kind of brazenness in terms of like what we're seeing in El Salvador, what we're
Hmm.
seeing in Argentina, as well as in Europe. And I think that's disturbing on the one hand, but at the same time, I think it's overdue. I think we've had this period in history where we've been sort of pretending that the conflicts aren't there, pretending that the income disparities aren't there. And it's true everywhere. Climate change is true everywhere. So I think we're entering into a reconfiguration of the global order. What
Hmm.
that involves, I think nobody actually knows, but there are a lot of powerful people putting their thumbs on the scale, trying to tip it towards their favor.
In regard to mass deportation happening in the United States right now, and I've sort of done a deep dive as a history buff on the history of this happening sort of before in this country. But this has sort of escalated now in a way that is extremely concerning, has everyone terrified, of course, because we're now having legal residents being deported to, basically concentration camps in El Salvador. So I know we're not just watching this here, but the rest of the world is also watching this for a live reaction. I mean, the president of the United States just defied the Supreme Court.
Well, and to your point about the world, I think American tourism is going to suffer greatly.
Mm,
Because certainly amongst Canadians, we are not going to visit America anytime soon because we don't have any rights as visitors. And I think this is also true of Europeans. My question here, because this is terrifying, and my question here is how much of this is symbolic versus how much of this is the start of a horror,
mm,
right? The start of something much deeply terrifying. And where I'm cautiously optimistic that what we're seeing is symbolic, that they don't actually plan to do mass deportations, partly because they just don't have the ability, right? They don't have, there's a lot of logistical structure. Like if you look at the Nazis and how they created the Holocaust, it happened very slowly
hmm.
because it takes a lot of time to move all those people, right? Especially if you're
Exactly.
flying them somewhere like El Salvador. So there's a part of me that hopes that they've played their card too soon, that they're creating this symbolic gesture to bully the Supreme Court, to bully the judiciary, to really try to consolidate power into the White House, into the executive, and that they understand if they did started to break up families, if they did started to ship people out, they would have open rebellion, that
Hmm.
that they would have a revolution in the streets, and obviously it depends upon which communities they pick, right? And they are deliberately picking on, say, trans people, and they're deliberately picking on, immigrants from Latin America, because these are folks that have already been dehumanized in the eyes of many Americans.
Hmm.
And these are folks who are already considered, unfortunately, subhuman. And that's the fascist playbook, right? Is to try to dehumanize people and try to make them feel as if they're disposable. On the one hand, the legal community is pushing back. The judiciary is pushing back, and they're saying,
Yes.
you can't do this. At the very least, we need due process. But the larger issue is whether communities will unite, especially different ethnicities, but even different ideological, because there are, for example, many Republicans amongst Latinos in the United States, but that doesn't mean they're in favor of deportation, right? That doesn't mean they're in favor of legal immigrants in the United States being deported. So I'm hoping we will see a pushback. I'm hoping that they have crossed the line and have done it too soon, which, as to what you've published previously, speaks to the incompetence of this
Yes.
particular administration. I'm hoping that we are seeing that incompetence in the legal environment and they are about to get clobbered by the judiciary, but more importantly, by regular people, right? We are the ones that
Yeah.
have to be outraged, and we are. But it is scary. Like I'm not going to the United States anytime soon, unfortunately, and nor are a lot of others. But for those of you who are there, and now's the time to be fighting back.
And a lot of people definitely do carry that sentiment because the resistance is building. I remember there was reporting in early February that Trump was enraged with how slow the deportation process was going. So he, like, I guess, fired one of the ICE directors. There was an understanding that you can't just, do cast a spell and 100 million people are like,
But
this
this
is
is how
not
this
how
guy
this works.
thinks. But it is how he thinks. He's doing the same thing with tariffs. He thinks that all of a sudden
Yes.
he can create a magic spell and the global supply chains will reconfigure. And in both cases, it just doesn't work that way. Even if it's the private sector and not just the public sector, there is a lot of symbolism here that I think is part of the media spectacle that this particular regime likes to peddle in. But whether they are fully committed and whether they want to build the infrastructure for a Holocaust, whether they
Mhm.
want to build the infrastructure to have more manufacturing in America, I think they don't know how to do either of them, thankfully. But the question is whether they get enough people supporting the concept. And
Mm.
that's where it's your work is crucial, and the work of other people who are doing the grassroots reporting, are doing the grassroots podcasting. That's where we are the warriors in the information struggle, because this is partly about public opinion. And the brazenness, the arrogance of the Trump regime is they're doing these things in hopes that people support them,
Mm.
in hopes that people go, hey, yeah, that's our guy. He's making a difference. And that's why we have to be so vocal, so adamant as to why this is horror, right? As to why this is an atrocity, as to why it is criminal, so that we may not have the ability to jail Trump now, but we will, right? And
Yeah.
that is something I think we have to keep saying over and over and over.
And a federal judge did just sort of issue a memorandum yesterday. I have to read it, but it's basically about how threatening to hold the Trump administration in contempt over openly defying this order. And it's something that I think about because people have looked at the other branches of government sort of falling in the United States and then looking to see, okay, what's the military going to do? And something that has routinely come up again is the military going to, obey their oaths to the Constitution or just be full on in favor of Trump. If Trump were to invoke the Insurrection Act, which is something that they talk about in Project 2025, um, with the mass purging of the military in terms of leadership as they've done in the past, what do you think would happen? Like, I'm
So
genuinely curious about what other people think.
let me answer that question, but first address what you started to say, which is about the courts, because I'm
Mhm.
hoping it doesn't get there.
Yeah.
Right? I am hoping that the not just the judiciary, but the legal profession, because I think what the courts can do first is hold the lawyers for the government in contempt.
Yeah.
Because where Trump and his cronies are to a certain extent insulated from these legal battles, because it's like they're fundamentally, at least now, not going to be held accountable. The lawyers who represent them can be jailed for contempt,
Yeah.
right? They can be held accountable by the judges who are part of their profession. And that's where you could have some pushback. That's where you could have some of them at the very least saying, okay, that's where it crumbles. That's where the pieces start to come back. But your point about the military is, I think, a big unknown. It's a big variable. And there's two parts to this. There's the officer corps, right? There are the people who fundamentally are in the chain of command, and there have been a lot of purges. And not only that, but there are a lot of pro-Trump people within the officer corps. And it's
Hmm.
partly just because China is a huge variable for the US military.
Hmm.
And there are a lot of, what have been historically called hawks, right? The sort of US hawks who are very pro-military, very pro-conflict. They are terrified about China's growing military capability, and they are very much aligned with Trump because they feel that Trump has the arrogance to take on China in a more direct confrontation, versus the Democrats were looking at diplomacy. The Democrats were looking at trade. The Democrats were looking at soft power rather than hardcore military power as a deterrent. But the rank and file are different. Because I like to joke how the United States military is actually the largest, most advanced socialist organization in the world. Because every member gets free healthcare, free education, guaranteed salary, benefits for their friends and family. Like, it is remarkable how many working class Americans really benefit from being in the U.S. military.
Exactly.
And it changes their politics. Like, these are the Bernie people, right? These are the AOC, the Jasmine Crockett's. Like, this is where a lot of the, like, democratic socialists of America, they are veterans. Like, It is remarkable how many veterans. So I don't know. I think the variable is, yes, you could see the military go along with it, but there could be a lot of sabotage. There could be a lot of internal dissent that, just as it's difficult to deport people, just as it's difficult to reconfigure supply chains, I hope it'll be difficult to get the U.S. military to do things when the morale is such that most members know that this is unjust, right? Know that this is immoral. And they didn't sign up to deal with Americans. They signed up to get an education. Like, they signed up to get free health care. Right? They didn't sign up to go and, be a cop somewhere in America that someone is protesting.
Exactly.
So this is where, again, I think, to your larger point, we are dealing with a powerful but incompetent regime. And the more that they try to play their hand, the more they try to push forward with what is openly a fascist agenda, I think the more that they're failing. And this is where the last time, I came on your podcast and we talked about this, we both expressed skepticism about the coming elections, right? Both about their integrity, but also around how fair they would be or democratic. But I do think we see a window here where Elon Musk in particular is so unpopular that the Democrats could win the midterms tremendously.
Yeah.
And then have impeachment.
Yeah.
Whether that amounts to anything, who knows? But I am seeing little glimmers of hope in the timeline because of the incompetence, because of the way these guys are so arrogantly thinking that their little measures, their magic spells, as you mockingly put it, will actually achieve their agenda, because I'm not sure it will.
This is true, and we saw that happen in Wisconsin, where the Democrat-supported judge Susan Crawford beat his machine after he poured like $20 million into that race, and his PAC is like, okay, well, we lost Wisconsin, but we're going to keep spending elsewhere. And their goal essentially was to win Wisconsin, because one of the things Musk said was, we need the courts because we keep losing in the courts. And one of the things that the House had passed, I believe it was last week, was the No Rogue Rulings Act. Basically, it would prevent federal judges from issuing nationwide injunctions to stop the administration. So they are openly, advocating for what they want to happen here, and it's honestly a lot. I mean, another thing that was introduced was the SAVE Act, which is going to be a huge voter suppression. So they're actively trying to do all of this before the midterms, which politically speaking and historically speaking could backfire horribly.
Yes, and that's why I feel they are playing their card too early. But you've noticed a few times here, and I think both of us have used the F word, fascist.
Yeah.
And I think it is crucial and strategic that we do that for a number of different reasons. Number one, I think they fit the definition historically, because one of the core elements of fascism is corporate rule, is having the private sector do as much as possible. And this isn't like your old school Republicans that sort of saw a value in the civil service. These are people who are trying to completely destroy the administrative state and replace it with a corporate state. And the other is the all-powerful leader. Right? Having all power concentrated into the executive, even doing as much as they can to neutralize the judiciary, let alone Congress, that is really dangerous. And I think more and more Americans are cluing into that and are realizing that that's not American democracy, that you need the checks and balances, and that it doesn't matter which force, which individual is in power. If they have absolute power, it's going to be bad for Americans. So I feel that there is a connecting the dots at play. But the other here that I think Americans need to be conscious of, and I say this as a Canadian looking from the outside, is Trump is destroying America's reputation. Like this is going to be in history books for centuries as to the fastest, most absurd bankrupting of a reputation, of trust. And it's going to hurt American business. It's going to hurt American trade. And the analogy here that I think all Americans should be embarrassed about is, for the last like 60 years, 80 years, if you wanted to insult somebody, you'd call them a Nazi.
Yeah.
Right? And if you really want to insult somebody, you'd call them Hitler. Well, we're now seeing a complete seismic change where I think in the future, if you want to insult someone, you're going to call them MAGA. And if you really want to insult someone, you're going to call them Trump. Like that. If you think about it, America, you've outdone Germany. Right? Like, and you haven't even committed the atrocities at scale yet.
Exactly.
And that's why I think they are playing their cards too soon. They've already lost the reputation. They've lost the trust. They're the clowns of the world. And now it's America's opportunity to sweep in and kick them out of office and turn it around, right? And get this potential reputation out of the gutter by saying, oh, yeah, we screwed up. We're getting rid of that guy.
And to your point with like the deliberate destructions of diplomatic relationships that were made over the span of like a century or so, if we miraculously survive this, how long is this going to take to clean up? Because I would assume for a country like Canada and our other allies that they would be reluctant to want to even talk to us again about trade and other things.
See, that's the paradox, and I think there's two answers, two parts to that answer. I think this is so terrible that the relief would be cathartic for everybody. So, do you remember? Right.
Do you remember the relief when Biden got elected? Like all the world leaders galvanized.
Absolutely, yeah. But this would be bigger. Like that was kind of just a bad nightmare. This is, an actual dystopia. So on the one hand, I think the catharsis would be so intense that there'd be a lot of leeway. There'd be a lot of room for forgiveness, especially if, if we didn't get a moderate Democrat, but we got a visionary Democrat, right? And I mean a visionary Democrat because I think that's what it's going to take. That the reason Trump and MAGA is so successful is they're anti-establishment. And where the Democrats maybe now could win on a, pro-establishment message, I think the Democrats need to come in with a vision for the future that addresses wealth inequality, that addresses, the feeling that we are all being swallowed by AI. And, there's this technological like there's all these like climate change is another, like there's all these existential angst that if the Democrats could actually produce a visionary, like someone who actually could say, I have a dream, I have a vision for the future, and I want, to unite everybody. Yeah, that would work for the rest of the world tremendously. But the second part of this answer is, and I hate to say this, but it implicates me as much as yourself, is civil war. Right? Yeah. Is whether the losing side would accept the loss. Yeah. Right? And that is something I think that everyone is conscious of, everyone is worried about. And that goes back to my original point of we need a visionary. We need someone who, we're never going to get everybody, but if we had a plurality of 60, 65, even 70%, then all of a sudden that minority of, crazy militant fascists becomes even more isolated, even more
Exactly.
marginalized, and that's how you could avoid a civil war. Is you need a plurality. You
Yeah.
need someone who can really bring people together, and maybe the incompetence is so distasteful, even to some Republicans, that becomes possible. Right? That the desire for competence, the desire for someone who can actually help Americans rather than just create chaos, it could be there.
And Civil War was definitely one of the things that was mentioned prior to the 2024 election. In Canadian, it was written in an article by Politico that Canada essentially was worried about a civil war happening in the United States. To your point about the incompetence, we've seen like multiple things come out like in the past few months. JD Vance going to Greenland with his wife and begging people to meet with him.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Greenland for a second?
Well, and I'm sure you saw this, how they later fired the head of the military base there.
Wow.
And it was a she, which is of course part of the dynamics
Yeah.
because they don't believe in women or minorities being leaders. But
Hmm.
in particular, it's because she denounced Vance after he left.
Wow.
And I think she did it as part of her duty. Like, I would argue that she did that as part of her military duty because he's so offended the local
Yes.
government and the locals that she felt she had to say, yeah, he doesn't speak for all of us
Hmm.
to be able to maintain morale on the base.
Exactly.
Right. And then she got
Exactly.
fired for that, which to me is hypocrisy because she was covering the US's ass
Yeah,
because
basically.
Vance was so embarrassing. Anyway, please.
I mean, you'd basically have Denmark building up their military presence in Greenland. And I just, out of all of the people sending Vance, it's like Trump is already incompetent. We've known that since 2015. But Vance, it's like, it's a different level of stupidity mixed with
Yes.
incompetence,
Yes.
which
Which
is,
which is an ideologue,
yeah.
right? Because the people around, like, Trump is fundamentally just a deal maker. Like,
Mhm.
I think he is much more of just a narcissist who likes power rather than an ideologue. But he is surrounded by various stripes of ideologues who unite around the kind of libertarian umbrella, but they are different versions of libertarians. But they all have visions of the world which are delusional,
Yes.
right? That are based heavily on theory and ideology, not on history, not on systems, not on research, but just their crazy ideas. And I love crazy ideas myself, but I wouldn't base global trade on them, right? Like,
Exactly.
and that's where I think it's not just incompetence, it's arrogance. And
Yeah.
it's an arrogance that they believe they're right and they're being proven wrong in real time. It's just very costly for everybody. And I think that's why corporate America at a certain point is just going to run out of patience and be like, we'll try anybody but these clowns. As long as we get some stability, as long as someone just makes rules and sticks to them.
Because in relation to that, we've seen the stock markets go up and down as one thing that's been happening, but also the staggering incompetence of Signalgate for that to come out of our government.
Yeah, and it speaks to how this has been a field day for foreign adversaries.
Yes,
Right. So
yes,
China remains the primary beneficiary of all of this. I mean, everyone
mhm,
likes to point to Russia and say that Trump and his cronies are in Russia's pocket. I don't think so. I think the Occam's razor explanation is they're just dumb. And Russia and China and anyone else who's able or willing to take advantage of this, they're doing it.
yeah,
And that is a scandal unto itself. That, to your point about cleanup, whatever the next administration is, they're going to have a lot of hackers in the nest. They're going to have a lot of holes and vulnerabilities, and it's going to cost them a lot to rebuild those technical secure systems so that they're secure again. Because the other great line I read the other day is the United States is now part of the Chinese surveillance system.
yes.
because everything in the United States is now hacked and owned by China. So China's able to spy not just on Chinese folks, but on Americans too. And
Exactly.
I think Americans should be rather upset about that.
In the side that we're seeing here with this attack on the intellectuals and historians, we're also seeing something that JD Vance has prophesized a long time ago from people like Curtis Yarvitz and Peter Thiel about attacking the universities of America because it's the establishment that is so chaotic. And what we're seeing now is, the Trump administration going after Harvard, Harvard not caving in, and other universities are sort of doing the same thing. Where do you think this ultimately will end here? Because they're going after the universities, and if they don't agree with them, then they're going to take their federal funding. This anti-intellectualism movement, I'm not sure it's going to be successful with them.
I don't know. I'm less optimistic. And I say this because not everyone is as wealthy as Harvard.
That is true.
Right? Only Harvard, no, I shouldn't say only Harvard. Harvard has resources that allows it to do that. Hopefully they set a tone, to your point. Hopefully others, just out of bluffing, go along with Harvard in hopes that they get a critical mass of post-secondary educational institutions that maintain their integrity. I'm not optimistic. And I say that because unfortunately there is a lot of power that the Trump administration can use as a bully pulpit to cower a lot of universities that are already terrified and that don't have backbones, quite frankly.
Yes, that is true.
Right? And again, the only reason Harvard has one is they got a lot of money. They have already, like, they threw their past president under the bus over Palestine and related issues. So like Harvard is not necessarily the best example of academic integrity. But I think we are seeing an attack on professors, on research, on post-secondary education. And I think it is going to initially be successful. And it's partly the university's fault. It's partly the Democrats' fault. Because the status quo in universities has been rotten for a long time. And the Trump administration is just taking advantage of that. But the defenses aren't there. And I say they're not there in the sense that it's really difficult to have critical thinking in universities to begin with because they are so politicized. Trump is just exploiting that. The Trump people are exploiting that. Hopefully, and hear this, I'm being utopian. I don't think this is going to happen. Hopefully, we will see more independent researchers, right?
Yeah.
Like you get to be an independent journalist. And, while it is difficult, you still get to sell books directly. You still get to get subscriptions directly.
Yeah.
I would love to see independent academics who can, have people pay $5 to take their class, sell their books directly. And they're just like, I am too independent to be part of Harvard or any other. Like if thousands and thousands of academics did that and a Substack academic version emerged, and, we democratize, like, to me, that would be better. I don't see it happening. But the last time you and I chatted, we talked about how the mainstream media is kind of a problem. Yes. And it kind of needs to fail in order for new things to rise. Well, I kind of have the same position when it comes to universities, but I'm an outlier in that regard.
I do agree that, to your point, that despite even if there is sort of like a Wiener bit of optimism that ultimately, even if Harvard in a group will not cave, that we probably will see some universities cave. Yeah. And eventually what that's going to do is start like a whole chain effect, which is going to be larger. And I wanted to ask you sort of two more questions here. Democracy versus authoritarianism. Just based off what we've seen here and around the world, what do you think?
It's not looking good. I mean, my emotional vibe throughout our whole conversation is, I'm anxious. I got a lot of angst. But I wrote recently about this concept of the dictator's dilemma. And the dictator's dilemma is this kind of truth that historians know, but that most people don't, which is that authoritarian regimes always fail. That they are fundamentally inefficient because on the one hand, they get surrounded by yes men. Like the leader eventually only has people who lies to him and tells him everything is great,
Hmm.
even when everything sucks. And that leads to an inefficient regime. But the other is that people respond better to friendliness than meanness. People are more productive when they are incentivized with good feelings than when they're threatened and doing
Yeah.
it out of fear. So democracy fundamentally is more prosperous, is more productive, is more innovative, is smarter. And that's why in the post World War II environment, we had a lot of prosperity, we had a lot of innovation, because we had a lot of democracies that were creating stuff and ideas. We are seeing an attack on democracy because I think democracy was asleep at the wheel. I think
Yeah.
there was a lot of complacency. I think there was a lot of arrogance. And I think to go to, your book on resistance and my larger work around reinvention, we need to see a new form of democracy, a new form of participatory democracy, of direct
Yes.
democracy, of technological democracy, even if you want to call it that. I think we're starting to see the seeds of that. I think Canada, if it has enough time to survive, will definitely have the potential for some experiments. I think Europe is going to start experimenting with this. I think to go to your larger question, there has been a wake up call. I think a lot
Yeah.
of people are realizing that woke is not just a state of mind. We have to actually wake up because this is scary shit. Notwithstanding that sleep
Exactly.
is important because we started there. But I think to end my rambly answer, the stakes are high and the battle is becoming more intense. As to who will win, I don't know, but I think both sides are ratcheting up for some major conflict.
That is very true. If you are looking for a podcast or a show on sort of just a bit of reprieve, but also something that expresses your emotions accurately, definitely check out MetaViews because it's the best. It's the best out there for independent news. So check it out. I definitely
And
need
my
to.
secret is it's my therapy. So it's partly how I'm dealing with all this.
Once again, my guest is Jesse Hirsh, former Canadian journalist and the host of the MetaViews show. Thank you so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure.